I was talking with a friend the other day, and we landed on the topic of Martin Luther King Jr. They got this very specific look on their face, a kind of soft, reverent nostalgia. You know, they said that I have a dream. Speech is probably the most beautiful thing America has ever produced. It's proof that we can be better. They seemed genuinely moved by the memory of it, like it was a comforting national lullaby. I agreed, but then I brought up James Baldwin's perspective on that same era. I mentioned how Baldwin saw that dream not as a gentle aspiration, but as a call to dangerous work, the brutal, soul-excavating labor required to tear down the very structures that made the dream necessary in the first place. And the change in my friend's demeanor was instant. The warmth in their eyes cooled, the relaxed posture stiffened just slightly. Well, they said, with a new edge in their voice, that sounds a little extreme, divisive. King was about unity, not demolition. That gap, that chasm between celebrating the dream and recoiling from the work it demands, exactly what this is all about. We love the idea of a healed nation, but we are terrified of the surgery. We'll quote the dream, but we won't pay the bill for its fulfillment. And it's in that contradiction that you find the ghost of James Baldwin asking a question we're still too afraid to answer. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the powerful and, often uncomfortable wisdom of James Baldwin.
Absolutely. Powerful is the right word. And necessary, I think.
Definitely necessary. We're going to explore what he meant by this phrase, dangerous work, how his insights really challenge our, standard understanding of the American dream.
Which is a huge part of it.
Yeah, and why his call for truth and empathy remains so critically important for national healing and resilience today, especially in the United States.
It really does.
And you'll hear how these big ideas, these concepts play out not just in grand political movements, but in the everyday actions of individuals really striving for change, real transformation. Baldwin's dangerous work for systemic transformation. So when James Baldwin declared that the country will now go to work and very hard work, very dangerous work to change itself, he wasn't talking about a new jobs program or some minor policy adjustment.
No, not at all. He meant something much, much deeper, more fundamental.
Something that gets right to the core.
Exactly. What's truly fascinating about Baldwin's concept of dangerous work is its sheer scope. He didn't mean physical labor in the usual sense, although, that could certainly be part of it.
Sure.
He meant soul work, blood work. That's the phrase he used, a kind of existential renovation.
Existential renovation?
Yeah. Digging deep into the very marrow of America, as he put it, to rearrange its foundational bones.
So not just painting the walls, but actually restructuring the house.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It isn't about superficial adjustments or, patching up cracks here and there. It implies a complete reevaluation and reconstruction of what America is actually built on.
And that's why it's dangerous, because it challenges the comfortable narrative.
That's a huge part of it. It challenges everything comfortable, everything we've been taught to accept as normal, as just the way things are.
You mentioned foundational bone. What exactly are those deep-seated elements he was pointing to, the things that make this work so inherently dangerous?
Well, Baldwin was unflinching, wasn't he? He pointed directly at the historical injustices the U.S. was built upon. Genocide, slavery, patriarchy, and greed.
He didn't pull any punches.
Not at all. And these aren't just unfortunate events in the distant past. He argued they are embedded in our systems or institutions, maybe even our national psyche.
So they're still active in a way.
Deeply active. These deeply entrenched historical injustices are the foundations that resist being disturbed. They push back. And that makes the work inherently dangerous to the status quo, dangerous to those who benefit, consciously or unconsciously, from that status quo.
So to truly change.
To truly change, Baldwin argued, the nation must confront these really uncomfortable truths at its core. It has to dismantle the structures built upon them and then, crucially, reconstruct something entirely new. That's why it's dangerous, it threatens deeply held beliefs, myths about the nation, and established power structures.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because we often associate that civil rights era with Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, right? That vision of harmony, unity.
The sort of soft focus version, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. But Baldwin, with his, as you said, unflinching gaze, he never romanticized that dream, did he?
No, he absolutely did not. He saw it not as some gentle, hopeful vision that would just magically happen if everyone was nice. He saw it as a direct challenge, a call to immediate and quite radical action.
How did he square that with King's message then?
Well, he famously clarified King's legacy. He said, and this is powerful, King did not die dreaming. He died laboring, marching, writing, agitating, risking everything to bend the moral arc of a world too comfortable in its cruelty.
Wow. Died laboring.
Yeah, it's not just a poetic phrase. It's Baldwin putting this profound emphasis on the action required. He totally understood that King's dream could be fulfilled, but, and this is the key, only if the nation was willing to undertake the brutal and beautiful work of transformation.
Brutal and beautiful. That's quite a pairing.
It is. Because the work is hard, it's painful, it involves tearing things down. That's the brutal part. But the goal, the potential outcome, is beautiful. But it wasn't about cosmetic changes, empty slogans, or just letting a few people into the existing system while the system itself remains unjust.
Right. It wasn't just about integration into a flawed structure.
Exactly. For Baldwin, it meant nothing less than the demolition of racism, of class hierarchy, of national mythologies that keep us sleepwalking through injustice.
Sleepwalking through injustice.
Yeah, he saw those myths, things like American exceptionalism, or the idea that everyone starts on an equal footing if they just try hard enough. He saw them as dangerous illusions, things that actually prevent genuine progress and allow suffering to continue. They needed fearless dismantling, not just like a gentle evolution. It's a fundamental tearing down before any real rebuilding can happen.
Okay, so let's fast forward. We bring that vision, that urgency to today. To 2025. How does it resonate now? I mean, his warnings about denial, about our difficulty confronting reality, they seem incredibly sharp right now.
Oh, absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture today, Baldwin's words hit hard. He warned that the dream is on life support and the machine keeping it alive is humming with denial.
Humming with denial. That's evocative.
Isn't it? And think about it. We are not post-racial. Arguably, we're in a post-truth era.
Where facts themselves are up for debate.
Exactly. And this isn't just about ignoring specific facts. It's about a broader societal, maybe inability to confront uncomfortable realities, to genuinely engage with different perspectives, or even to acknowledge historical wrongs in a meaningful way. We are not healed. We are haunted.
Haunted by what?
Haunted by the unresolved issues, the historical traumas that keep bubbling up, keep manifesting in our contemporary challenges. I mean, just consider recent events in the United States, the Capitol being stormed.
Unthinkable just a few years ago.
Right. The Constitution seemingly spat on by certain factions. And you hear the echoes of plantation logic, as Baldwin might put it, still influencing policy debates, legislative actions.
So the foundations he talked about.
They're still exerting influence. Sometimes really overtly, sometimes more subtly. But they're there. These are stark reminders that those foundational injustices Baldwin identified are far from resolved.
It sounds pretty bleak when you put it like that. But is there still a glimmer of something? Is the dream totally gone?
No, not according to Baldwin's underlying hope, I think.
Yeah.
And not if you look closely. Amidst all this, the dream persists. Maybe tattered, maybe smoldering, as one writer put it. But it's there. In the hearts of artists, organizers, young people, there's a resilience.
That resilience seems key.
It is. And Baldwin argued that truth and empathy are fundamentally dangerous to fascism. Why? Because dreaming together, embracing diversity, fostering genuine human connection, that is the single greatest threat to fascism's fragile ego.
Because fascism needs division.
It thrives on it. It needs division, fear, control. So unity, shared humanity, recognizing the other, those are its adversaries.
Yeah.
Baldwin really believed in the possibility of a country honest enough, humble enough to begin again. And that makes his words feel like, well, scripture for the insurgents of decency.
Insurgents of decency, I like that.
Me too. It's a guide for those who refuse to let despair just curdle into apathy. Those who still believe in a future shaped not by fear, but by courage and awareness. A future built on truth and real connection.
That's a really powerful frame. But, it can still feel overwhelming when we talk about systemic transformation on this huge national scale. So what does this dangerous work actually look like on the ground in contemporary social movements, in individual lives? How does it translate? I've been thinking a lot about James Baldwin's words, especially his call for America to undertake the hard and dangerous work of changing itself. It's easy to discuss this in abstract terms, but what does it actually look like for people today? I tried to imagine the human-level stories behind these grand ideas. Here's one that came to mind, a story about that dangerous work. Imagine a young woman in a place like Detroit. Let's call her Aaliyah. She's not a politician or a famous activist. She's a teacher who saw that the kids in her neighborhood had nowhere safe to play after school. The city had a vacant, debris-strewn lot that had been forgotten for a generation. Aaliyah's vision was simple. a community garden, and a playground. The dangerous work wasn't about facing down riot police. It was the slow, grinding danger of burnout and bureaucracy. It was the danger of losing hope when her funding applications were denied for the third time. It was the subtle danger in the pushback from a property developer who saw the lot not as a playground, but as a future luxury condo site. For Aaliyah and her small team of volunteers, every bag of soil they hauled, every rusty pipe they dug out of the ground, was an act of defiance. They were, in a very literal sense, renovating a small piece of America, proving that a space could be defined by community and care, not just by neglect and profit. This small, exhausting, and often thankless project was their battlefield for a better system.
That's a truly powerful story. And it illustrates perfectly how this dangerous work often manifests in the everyday. It's not always the big, dramatic confrontation.
Right. It's the grind.
It's the grind. It's the persistent daily struggle against systemic neglect, against powerful opposing interests, against just inertia. It's those invisible battles against economic forces, against deeply ingrained societal patterns that maintain disadvantage in certain communities, often along lines of race and class.
And I can immediately see how that connects to some of the theoretical frameworks people discuss, like critical race theory. How does Aaliyah's very personal struggle kind of reflect those broader academic ideas?
Oh, it connects beautifully. Take critical race theory, CRT. One of its core ideas is that race isn't just about individual prejudice, right? It's a social construct that's deeply embedded within our legal systems, our policies, our institutions.
It's used to maintain power structures.
Exactly. Used, often implicitly, to maintain power and privilege for certain groups. CRT emphasizes the need to actually challenge and dismantle these systems of oppression. So Aaliyah's fight against the bureaucracy, against the developer who sees that land only as potential profit, not as a vital community asset.
That is the challenge.
It's a direct challenge to the power structures that perpetuate neglect in marginalized communities. She's not just cleaning up a lot, she's actively working to dismantle a system that prioritizes profit over people, a system that historically and currently perpetuates racial and economic injustice by denying basic resources, like safe play spaces, to certain populations.
So her work forces a confrontation.
It forces a confrontation with the ingrained racial and economic hierarchies that led to that lot being neglected in the first place. It asks, why was it neglected and who benefits from that neglect?
Okay, and what about intersectionality? That's another term we hear. How does Kimberly Crenshaw's theory fit into Aaliyah's story?
That's also incredibly relevant here. Intersectionality theory helps us understand how different forms of oppression like racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, etc., don't operate in isolation. They intersect, they overlap, they compound each other.
Creating unique experiences of marginalization.
Precisely. So in Aaliyah's neighborhood, the children she's helping likely face challenges stemming from the intersection of poverty, their racial identity, perhaps gender dynamics, and certainly a lack of municipal resources and investment. Their lack of a safe place to play isn't just about poverty or just about race. It's about how these factors intersect to create specific compounded barriers.
And her project addresses that intersection.
Yes. By creating that community garden and playground, Aaliyah's work directly addresses these interconnected issues. It provides a space that actively counters these compounded forms of oppression, offering not just recreation, but a safe, empowering environment that affirms the community's worth.
So these theories aren't just abstract academic exercises.
Not at all. When you apply them to real-world examples like Aaliyah's, they help us identify the root causes of social problems, going beyond just the surface symptoms. They help develop effective, holistic strategies. They move us beyond, superficial solutions to address the underlying systemic issues, the evolving American dream, from individual aspiration to collective imperative.
Let's shift gears a bit, though it's deeply connected. We've all grown up with the American dream narrative, haven't we? That story of individual aspiration, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work hard, achieve personal success. It's a really powerful, almost foundational national myth for many.
It is deeply ingrained.
But what happens when that dream starts to feel, broken? Or just completely out of reach for a whole new generation? When it feels like the goalposts have moved, or maybe the playing field was never really level to begin with? That's definitely something James Baldwin had a lot to say about. Then I think about the American dream and how its meaning is shifting. I saw a conversation online started by a young man, a first-generation American named Javier, living somewhere in Texas. His parents had come to the U.S. with nothing and built a life through sheer hard work. Their dream was for him to go to college and get a stable, white-collar job. Javier did just that. He graduated with a degree in finance in 2024, only to find himself in a market of endless layoffs, working two unstable gig jobs to make payments on his crushing student loans. He felt a profound sense of shame, as if he had personally failed his parents' dream. But online, he found thousands like him. They weren't sharing tips on how to succeed in the old system anymore. Instead, they were questioning the system itself. Their conversations were a modern interpretation of Baldwin's philosophy. They were collectively dismantling the national myth that individual aspiration is enough. For Javier, the dream was no longer a big house and a corner office. The new, radical dream was a society where a college degree didn't mean a lifetime of debt, where healthcare wasn't tied to a precarious job, and where his success wasn't measured by how much he earned, but by the health and stability of his entire community.
Wow. Javier's experience. It just perfectly illustrates Baldwin's critique of American mythology, especially that individualistic version of the American dream.
Yeah.
Baldwin famously observed, and this is such a crucial quote, "The American Negro has the great advantage of having never believed that collection of myths to which white Americans cling, that their ancestors were all freedom-loving heroes, that they were born in the greatest country the world has ever seen, or that Americans are invincible in battle and wise in peace."
A great advantage, meaning a clearer view.
Exactly. A clearer, less romanticized view of the nation's true foundations and its current realities. Because historically marginalized groups, like Black Americans, never had the luxury of fully buying into that perfect, untarnished, mythical version of America. Their lived experience contradicted it daily.
So for Javier's generation, maybe more broadly now, it's not just about their personal failings if they don't achieve that old dream. It's about questioning the myths themselves.
Precisely. For Javier's generation, the national myth that individual aspiration alone is enough, or that the system is fundamentally fair if you just work hard enough, that myth is being fundamentally challenged by their lived experience. Crushing debt, precarious work, systemic inequalities, they see it.
And that changes the dream itself.
It has to. This realization shifts the American dream from being solely about narrow individual success, the house, the car, the corner office, towards becoming a collective imperative for radical societal restructuring.
A collective imperative. Say more about that.
It means the goal isn't just personal gain anymore. It's about dismantling the deeply ingrained belief that those traditional markers are the only measures of success. It's replacing them with a vision where true success is measured by the health, the stability, the well-being of the entire community. This new dream isn't about just striving harder within a broken system. It demands systemic change. It demands a reimagining of what prosperity and a good life even mean.
That is a huge shift in mindset. It really is moving from asking, how can I succeed in this system, to how can we change this system so that everyone can actually thrive?
Yes.
So how does Baldwin's thinking then connect to contemporary movements that really seem to embody this collective imperative, like Black Lives Matter?
Oh, it's a foundational connection.
Yeah.
Baldwin's work provides a crucial intellectual and, I'd argue, emotional foundation for movements like Black Lives Matter. His writings on systemic racism, police brutality, the deep-seated nature of white supremacy, they offer a framework for understanding experiences that are often dismissed, downplayed, or misrepresented by dominant narratives.
He gave language to things people were experiencing.
He did. For instance, Baldwin's analysis, like in his essay, A Report from Occupied Territory, unflinchingly highlighted how police forces in America often functioned, particularly in Black communities, not as neutral enforcers of law, but as representatives of white power and control.
Occupied territory. Strong words.
Very strong. And that direct, unwavering critique continues to inform contemporary debates around police reform, around accountability, around the systemic nature of racism within law enforcement today. He wasn't just talking about a few bad apples. He was diagnosing the rot in the barrel in the system itself.
And beyond just policing, how else do his ideas resonate in today's social justice conversations, especially now with so much happening online?
Well, his work delves so deeply into the intersections of identity, culture, and power. You see it in essays like Notes of a Native Son, or even his fiction like Giovanni's Room. These works provide a really crucial lens for contemporary discussions about how identity is constructed, how it's performed, especially when facing oppression, how our personal sense of self is shaped by the social structures around us.
And people are picking up on that online.
Absolutely. In the digital age, we're seeing this powerful resurgence of interest in Baldwin. His ideas, often distilled into sharp quotes or short analytical pieces, are being shared, discussed, recontextualized across all sorts of digital platforms by activists, by young people, by social justice movements.
So he's finding a new audience.
Definitely. This digital dissemination keeps his challenging, vital philosophy alive and relevant. It allows new generations to engage directly with his insights on race, identity, power, and to understand that often individual struggles are symptoms of much larger systemic failures. It also helps clarify the historical roots of current injustices, grounding modern movements in a deeper understanding of America's complicated past. Truth, empathy, and national healing in a post-truth political landscape.
Okay, so we circled back a bit to the opening story, that conversation with my friend. It hinted at this deep discomfort, didn't it, with the actual work Baldwin called for, that chasm between celebrating the dream and recoiling from the work it demands.
Yeah, that recoiling is key.
And Baldwin warned that this recoiling is often rooted in denial, a refusal to face uncomfortable truths, which, as he seemed to predict, becomes especially dangerous in what people now call a post-truth world.
Right, where objective facts seem to lose their footing and emotion often trumps reason in public discourse.
Exactly. Finally, I think about Baldwin's warnings against denial and the urgent need for truth and empathy. I heard a story about a man, a long-haul trucker from a deeply conservative part of the Appalachian Mountains. Let's call him Ray. Ray's worldview was shaped entirely by a media bubble that told him cities were war zones and the people in them were his enemies. One scorching summer day, his rig broke down right in the middle of a neighborhood in West Baltimore he'd been taught to fear his whole life. He was stuck. A local mechanic, a black man named Marcus, came to help. For 8 hours, as Marcus worked on the complex engine, they talked. Not about politics at first. They talked about their kids, the rising cost of groceries, the bad backs, the dream of one day retiring. Ray saw Marcus not as a political symbol, but as a man, a craftsman who took pride in his work and who treated him with kindness. Nothing in Ray's political identity changed that day. He didn't drive away with a new voting preference. But a crack had formed in the wall of his denial. The truth he had been fed was challenged by the simple, undeniable truth of a shared human moment. After I heard this, I thought that this is where national healing has to start. It's not about winning an argument. It's about creating a space where one person's humanity can't be denied by another. It's a small, fragile thing, but in a landscape of division, it feels like the most critical tool we have.
That's such a powerful anecdote, Ray and Marcus. It really gets to the essence of empathy, doesn't it? Especially in a society that's as deeply polarized as ours often feels.
It really does.
It echoes this idea that in these fractured landscapes, truth itself can become subjective. Facts alone often just bounce off people. Each side, each group, holds onto its own truth as if it's absolute, often completely disregarding the experiences, the feelings, the truths of others.
Which just hardens positions.
Exactly. It hardens positions and widens the chasms between us, making genuine dialogue, genuine understanding seem almost impossible sometimes. And you see this dynamic playing out not just in the U.S., but in many places around the world with deep historical grievances. Each group operates from its own sense of victimhood, convinced of its own incontrovertible truth, unwilling or unable to see the other's perspective.
So the argument is that in these really emotionally charged situations, politics isn't just about who has the right facts. It's about understanding the emotional reality, even if it feels completely different from your own rational understanding.
Precisely. Some of the research we've looked at explicitly argues that when societies are deeply divided, you need to add empathy into the political discourse, into how leaders engage with each other and the public. It might mean doing what feels emotionally correct in a situation, even if it doesn't perfectly align with what seems factually or rationally correct.
Emotionally correct, meaning acknowledging the feeling behind the position.
Yes, recognizing that feelings, fear, anger, resentment, historical pain often override facts in these deeply personal and group-based conflicts. It's about making an effort to step into someone else's shoes, not necessarily to agree with their conclusions, but to genuinely try and understand why they feel the way they do, what experiences led them there.
That brings up a really crucial question then. What exactly is empathy in this context, and why is it so vital for national healing, particularly in a country like the U.S. that often struggles with acknowledging its own history? It definitely sounds like more than just, feeling sorry for someone.
Oh, absolutely. It's far more profound than simple pity or sympathy. The word empathy actually comes from the Greek empathia, which meant physical affection or passion. Today, it's formally defined as the ability to imagine oneself in another's place and understand the other's feelings, desires, ideas, and actions.
So it's an active imaginative process.
It's an active emotional exercise of projecting oneself into the shoes of others, to really try and grasp their perspective from the inside. It's distinct from sympathy, which is more feeling for someone, maybe pitying them, without necessarily understanding why they feel that way. And it's also different from personal distress, which is when someone else's suffering makes you feel uncomfortable, and your primary motivation is to stop your own discomfort.
Whereas empathy is more about the other person.
Right. True empathy, like sympathy, is linked to an altruistic motivation, a genuine desire to understand and potentially alleviate the other person's suffering.
Okay, so if we can cultivate that, what are some of the concrete benefits? Especially in a society as fractured, as polarized as the U.S. often seems.
Well, the benefits are numerous and really vital for conflict resolution and national healing. One of the biggest is its power to reduce violence and promote understanding.
How does that work?
It's a key factor in enhancing cooperation and building better intergroup relations. Think back to Ray and Marcus. That simple empathetic gesture from Marcus, just treating Ray with kindness and skill, talking about shared human concerns, started to chip away at Ray's prejudice. It showed that even deeply ingrained biases, often fueled by misinformation, can begin to erode through positive human interaction. Empathy fosters a willingness to see the other as fully human, which makes it much, much harder to sustain animosity or justify violence against them. It's fundamentally the antidote to dehumanization. Another crucial benefit is that empathy engages emotions and can heal collective pain. In diverse societies, conflicts often bubble up from uneven power dynamics, perceived dominance, or a deep-seated sense of historical victimhood. In those situations, feelings often override facts.
You can't just argue people out of their pain.
Exactly. Empathy, by allowing us to acknowledge and maybe even share in another's emotional experience, can begin to heal that collective pain. It can open hearts in a way that statistics or logical arguments alone often can't. As one source we looked at put it, knowledge may influence decision-making, but it is emotion that truly changes behavior.
Emotion changes behavior.
You can present all the facts you want, but until you connect on an emotional level, real behavioral shifts are unlikely. Empathy is often that emotional key.
It sounds incredibly powerful, almost like a superpower for bridging divides. But are there limits? Is empathy always the answer? Is it a universal solution for all conflicts, especially when you're dealing with deep-seated injustices that seem to demand more than just understanding? Maybe they demand accountability or justice.
That's a very important nuance, and you're absolutely right to raise it. Empathy is incredibly powerful, but it is not a panacea. It has significant limitations that we have to acknowledge. First, it doesn't, and perhaps shouldn't, fully address demands for accountability for serious crimes or major historical injustices.
So it doesn't replace justice?
No. While empathy can facilitate crucial aspects of transitional justice, things like truth commissions, reconciliation efforts, it doesn't replace the need for a functioning criminal justice system or for holding perpetrators accountable where appropriate. Empathy-promoting initiatives should be seen as working alongside other mechanisms for ensuring accountability and providing reparatory justice, definitely not as a substitute for them. Second, the effectiveness of empathy is often time and context dependent. There's this concept in conflict resolution studies called ripeness.
Ripeness.
Yeah. Empathy is often most effective when societies are emotionally ripe for change. This usually means that the collective emotions within the society support moving towards peace, often because they've reached a mutually painful stalemate.
Meaning everyone realizes the conflict is just too costly to continue.
Exactly. If one side or both still believes they can win through force, or if they're completely unwilling to acknowledge the other side's suffering or legitimacy, then empathy alone might not be enough to spur meaningful action. It often takes a certain level of shared exhaustion with the conflict for empathy to really take root on a broad scale. And finally, we have to be aware of inherent bias in empathy. Studies consistently show what's called an intergroup empathy bias.
Meaning we feel more for our own group.
Precisely. People tend to feel more empathy for members of their own in-group compared to members of out-groups. There's also something called the identifiable victim bias.
What's that?
We tend to feel much more empathy for a single specific identifiable individual, like little Jessica stuck down the well, than for a large abstract group of suffering people, like statistics about famine victims.
So stories matter more than stats.
They often do, for evoking empathy. That's why anecdotes like Ray and Marcus are so powerful. But it also means that fostering broader societal empathy requires intentional effort to overcome these natural biases. First-hand stories, personal narratives, these are crucial tools in social movements precisely because they make the suffering identifiable and relatable, overcoming that statistical numbness. Strategies for fostering empathy and building a more just society.
Okay, so empathy is crucial, Powerful, but it has limits and biases. If we accept all that, how can we actively cultivate it? What are the practical strategies? What can individuals, communities, maybe even institutions do to maximize its benefits and try to overcome those limitations? It sounds like it needs more than just wishing people were nicer. It needs deliberate effort, maybe structured approaches.
It absolutely does. It's not just going to happen by itself, especially in polarized times. Psychosocial literature points to several effective mechanisms for intentionally evoking empathy. One key strategy is perspective-taking exercises.
What does that involve?
It involves actively developing the ability to understand how a situation appears to another person and how that person is reacting cognitively and emotionally. It's not just guessing, it's an active process.
Trying to see through their eyes.
Exactly. Seeking to understand their lived experiences, their perceptions. And it requires several steps. Ideating, really imagining what a situation means to them. Hypothesizing, making informed guesses based on what you know, but holding them lightly. And then, crucially, engaging directly with them to truly understand, to test your hypotheses, and to reassess your own assumptions. You have to be willing to adjust your outlook based on what you learn.
So what would that look like in practice? For communities actually trying to bridge divides, say, here in the U.S.?
It can take many forms. Things like organizing structured intercommunal or interreligious dialogues where people share experiences safely. Setting up national volunteering services that intentionally bring diverse groups together on common projects. Facilitating joint retreats for leaders or members of different groups. Promoting cultural exchange programs, even language learning, and especially fostering storytelling initiatives where individuals from different backgrounds can share their personal narratives in a structured, respectful environment.
So it's about creating connection.
It's all about promoting direct dialogue and interpersonal connection. Because empathy, deep empathy, rarely comes from just objective observation or reading statistics. It requires genuine human connection, putting a face and a personal story to someone you might otherwise dismiss or stereotype. Another really powerful strategy is compassion training and increasing motivation for intergroup empathy. This isn't just about understanding, but about actively cultivating positive emotions, compassion, kindness towards others, even when faced with their suffering or differences.
Training people to be more compassionate.
In a way, yes. But it's also about making compassion a more visible, more socially desirable norm within groups. Actively leveraging the positive social values that already exist in a culture can be very effective. For instance, you mentioned the Ethiopian concept of Yilinyoter earlier, that sense of self-restraint and deep consideration for others' feelings. Every culture has values like these, highlighting and amplifying such shared humane values through public discourse, education, media that can powerfully increase intergroup empathy and harmony. It's about reminding people of their shared capacity for kindness and making that behavior socially valued and rewarded.
That makes sense. But what about managing our own reactions in these tough conversations? Because let's be honest, it can be really difficult to stay open and empathetic when you feel attacked or misunderstood or just plain defensive.
That's a huge challenge. And it leads directly to the third key strategy, emotion regulation and reappraisal. This involves two main things. First, cognitive reappraisal, consciously reinterpreting an emotionally charged situation to change its emotional impact on you. Second, expressive suppression, managing your outward emotional expressions, not necessarily bottling them up, but choosing a constructive response over a reactive one.
Like Ray, the trucker, choosing not to react with fear initially.
Exactly. He could have defaulted to fear or anger based on his bubble. Instead, he somehow managed to reappraise the situation, to see Marcus as a helpful individual, a fellow human dealing with everyday stuff, not just a symbol of something he feared. Empathy isn't just raw feeling, it evolves with our cognitive skills and our moral values. The better individuals become at managing their own emotional reactions through these techniques, the better the chances for meaningful, constructive intergroup dialogue and cooperation. It helps prevent those knee-jerk aggressive responses and allows for a more considered, empathetic engagement.
So controlling that initial emotional flare-up lets you actually listen and engage properly.
Precisely. And one final strategy, which is really interesting, is reducing group entitativity. Entitativity.
Right.
It sounds academic, but it's a simple idea. It refers to the perception that a rival outgroup is just one single, monolithic, homogeneous block. Like they all think the same, act in lockstep, and are unified against your in-group.
Seeing them as the enemy, all identical.
Exactly. In many polarized societies, groups constantly accuse the other side of conspiring against them, seeing them as this singular entity, even when, in reality, that group is full of diverse individuals with differing opinions. Reducing this perception of a monolithic outgroup is crucial because it diminishes that intergroup empathy bias we talked about and makes positive interactions possible.
How do you do that?
By actively showing the diversity within the outgroup, highlighting intergroup differences, encouraging people to see members of the other group as individuals, fellow humans, with their own unique stories and perspectives. This can promote forgiveness for historical injustices, too, by making it harder to blame an entire, undifferentiated group. For example, specific training or media could consciously show the internal debates and differences within groups often perceived as monolithic, challenging those dangerous assumptions of a unified enemy. It reminds us that they are just as complex and varied as we are.
Okay, this is all incredibly helpful, focusing on human connection, perspective, managing emotions. But I still have this nagging question about the bigger picture. When we talk about empathy and then we talk about justice and the role of the state power, how do those things actually connect? Or maybe where do they conflict? It feels like there could be a real tension between focusing on individual emotional work and addressing the big systemic injustices that often require state action.
That's an absolutely essential question, and you've hit on a core tension. The interplay between empathy and state power is definitely complex, and it's often fraught with challenges. Critics rightly point out that if we focus only on individual empathy, we risk turning deep-seated social problems into mere NGO projects or issues of individual psychology.
Like it lets the system off the hook.
Exactly. It risks ignoring the fundamentally systemic issues that require state intervention, policy changes, structural reform. There's also a valid concern that state actors or powerful institutions might cynically appropriate the language of empathy funding human rights projects, talking about dialogue while actually using those initiatives to consolidate their own power or deflect calls for real change, ways that actually contradict the original intent of fostering genuine justice. It can become a form of empathy washing, perhaps.
So it really can't just be about individuals trying to be kinder to each other while the structures remain the same. There has to be systemic change happening concurrently.
Absolutely. And this brings us to that fundamental question. Where does empathy end and justice begin? When must the state, which is tasked with upholding the rule of law and addressing injustice, intervene with more than just promoting empathetic dialogue? How do we reconcile the very real need for empathy, for understanding, connection, reconciliation, with the equally vital, inviolable nature of justice and social justice, which demand accountability, redress for wrongs, and systemic fairness? Empathy can heal interpersonal wounds, it can foster dialogue, but it cannot by itself dismantle discriminatory laws or rectify massive historical harms like slavery or ongoing systemic racism. That requires concrete systemic action. And this brings us back full circle to thinkers like Baldwin and others like, say, Thomas Merton, who talked about whiteness itself as a kind of societal infection and original sin in American history. They argue for something beyond just politeness or superficial understanding. They argue for a radical, uncompromising love.
Radical love.
Yes, but not a passive, feel-good love. A love that transcends what some call cheap grace or superficial reconciliation. This kind of love, in their view, demands material and spiritual reparations. It demands the active dismantling of oppressive structures like what Michelle Alexander called the new Jim Crow, this system of mass incarceration that disproportionately affects communities of color. It demands fundamentally reforming the relationship between police and these communities. The core message is that mere integration or reconciliation without reparations, without deep structural change, is not enough and never will be enough.
So the love demands action, demands justice.
Precisely. The ultimate goal, as Baldwin so powerfully articulated it, is to create a society that allows all of us to be larger, freer, and more loving. And he understood this required a mutual liberation. He said, the price of the liberation of the white people is the liberation of the blacks, the total liberation in the cities, in the towns, before the law, and in the mind. It's this embrace of our mutual need for identity, for maturity, acknowledging our shared pains, yes, but moving decisively beyond passive guilt into immediate, concrete action for justice. It's a call for that deep, systemic transformation that allows for the full humanity and dignity of every single person.
Wow, we have certainly navigated some powerful and, definitely challenging territory today, digging into James Baldwin's thought, exploring his call for that dangerous work, his sharp critique and redefinition of the American dream, and the absolutely critical role of truth and empathy in a society as fractured as ours often feels.
It really shows that Baldwin's message, his challenge, it isn't just some historical footnote from the civil rights era. It feels incredibly alive today. It's a living challenge for us right now to confront our national contradictions, to finally move beyond denial, and to embrace the difficult, uncomfortable, but necessary labor of true transformation.
Yeah.
It's really about understanding, isn't it? That a society that truly wants to heal has to be willing to pay the full cost of that healing, not just, quote the nice parts of the dream.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Baldwin's legacy, maybe consider this. If the dream is the vision of a healed nation, and the dangerous work is the necessary surgery to get there, then perhaps the most profound act of faith we can undertake, individually and collectively, is to pick up that scalpel. Knowing full well the pain involved in cutting away the disease, the injustice, but trusting, truly trusting in that larger, freer, and more loving world that Baldwin believed could lie on the other side.